We also need to recognize that verbal messages can deceive. And the first thing we think of when we think of deceiving is outright lying. But there are other ways to deceive as well. Deceiving by omission, not giving the full story, for example. Verbal messages also vary in assertiveness. Think about what assertiveness means to you. True or false? Assertiveness and aggressiveness are the same thing. Well, let's look at the definitions. First of all, let's look at non-assertiveness. Non-assertiveness is basically not standing up for your rights, not saying what you want, not stating what you want. A lot of times, outright non-assertiveness can be driven by low self-esteem. It's basically, I lose, you win attitude. Aggressiveness, on the other hand, is the other extreme. Aggressiveness is basically the attitude that I win, you lose. I don't care how you want to do it. This is the way I want to do it. That's all that matters. Now, assertiveness, on the other hand, is something entirely different from aggressiveness. Assertiveness is just acting in your own best interest without denying others theirs. Assertiveness is saying what you like, what you want, and basically while respecting other people's desires. So assertiveness is basically an I win, you win situation. Assertiveness is a good thing. Sometimes we confuse assertiveness with aggressiveness, and I think this is a case of a connotation we might have learned about the word assertiveness. Sometimes I think in our society, when we say someone is assertive, we get a picture of someone who's pushy, like a more aggressive person. But that's not truly what assertiveness is. Assertiveness is a good thing. It's not stepping on other people. It's just stating your own wishes and desires. And the benefits of assertive communication are that you can express yourself in a polite way without alienating other people, defending and stating what you want and what you don't want, and really just maintaining your self-esteem while having respect for other people. And we all vary in our assertiveness, and this is great. I mean, we all have our own personalities. So some of us are more assertive than others. Some of us feel it's necessary to assert ourselves more than others, and we do vary in this based on our personalities. Now let's look at what disconfirmation is. Disconfirmation is when we discount a person and their communication. Basically, we respond to a person in the way that says, basically, you don't matter. I don't care what you say or think. How would you know that? That type of thing. On the other hand, confirming a person is really recognizing that person and their communication. Basically, it's saying, I'm listening, I agree with you. Rejection is different from each of these. Rejection acknowledges that they hear you, but they disagree. Now, between disconfirmation and rejection, think about which you would rather be confronted with. A disconfirming response or a rejection? We'll talk about this more in class. Some of the things that can cause disconfirmation are racism, ageism, sexism, ableism. Basically, it's looking at the other person and saying, you don't count. I don't put value or importance on what you say or think or are. Here's something else that we can recognize about language. Language only symbolizes reality. It isn't necessarily the reality. It's only words. Intentional orientation is judging from labels. In other words, you hear someone described or something described as a word, and you just accept that as being fact. Bob's a jerk. Oh, well, I'm going to stay away from Bob. He's a jerk. Extensional orientation, on the other hand, is realizing that I better reserve my judgment on this person or event or situation until I know myself firsthand what the answer is. Now, see, all of these concepts, if you think about this, all the concepts we've learned so far in this class really fit together, because when you think about, say, someone saying that Bob is a jerk can mean different things to different people. It has different connotations. And people have different perceptions of what constitutes a jerk. So someone who says Bob is a jerk may have experienced him being late several times, and that makes him a jerk to them. On the other hand, you might figure, no, that's not that terrible thing. I certainly wouldn't call him a jerk. So which of these do you think it's smarter to use, intentional orientation or extensional orientation? Really, the smarter one is to reserve your judgment and only take labels into consideration, but don't accept them as absolute fact, because language only symbolizes reality. It isn't necessarily the reality. Something else that people have a tendency to do, and we want to avoid this if we can as much as possible, and to be aware that other people may be going with what we call static evaluations. Now, is it true that everything and everyone changes with time? Absolutely. And it's been said that the one constant we can rely on is change, right? So you want to be careful about making static evaluations. Static evaluations are based on the past. They don't consider that things may have changed. If I, for instance, am interviewing people for a job, and Jake comes in, let's say I went to high school with Jake 20 years ago, and I think, oh my gosh, Jake was a slacker. He never came to school on time. He was just different. Slacker. That's how we knew him. And if I decide not to interview him 20 years later based on that evaluation, I'm using a static evaluation. I'm not taking into consideration that he may have changed during that time. Also, beware of allness. This is the assumption that everything can be known about a person, event, or object. There's always more to learn or to know about anyone, anything. Beware of confusing facts with inferences. Language can express both facts and inferences. Facts can be observed. For instance, let's take this second sentence under factual. The facts can be observed. The party's at the community center. That's a fact. On the other hand, we might make inferences from that fact that aren't necessarily true. We might make the inference that, oh, it must be open to the whole community. Is that necessarily true? Maybe not. So this happens many times in media, and we will talk more about this in class. We use facts and inferences all the time, and that's good. That's fine. We just need to be able to tell the difference between the two. Another thing that takes place sometimes in verbal communication is polarization. Looking at the world in terms of extremes. It's either or thinking. Are you for me or against me? Are you going tomorrow or not? Is the world black and white? No, absolutely not. Sometimes we try to make life easier by calling it black and white, but there are a lot of shades of gray. So sometimes it's not a matter of being for or against, but somewhere in between. And we have to realize that. Another word that they talk about in the chapter is indiscrimination. Indiscrimination is basically another word for stereotyping. Indiscrimination is not discriminating between individuals. In other words, we want to discriminate between individuals. We want to realize that maybe two people have something in common, but that doesn't mean that they have everything in common. Verbal messages are certainly influenced by our cultures, whether they're country cultures, family cultures, all those subcultures that each of us belongs to have our own individual cultures. Culture can teach norms, in other words, norms of how much we're going to cooperate, how we're going to respond to other people, sometimes based on their status, if it's a type of culture, how direct we feel comfortable being, how polite, where politeness comes in, when to be most polite, that type of thing. So culture can really drive a lot of the ways that we verbally communicate. Another thing to realize is something else that changes over time, very much like word connotations. Cultural identifiers. This is interesting because we have different words that mean different things as time goes on, and we will touch on this in class also to give some examples of this. It's interesting when we think about culture, gender is different, definitely part of culture. We are enculturated to be male, female, and in general, now these are just generalizations, but research has shown that we can make these generalizations. Of course, we're all individuals, but in general, women, females in our society are generally taught to be more polite, more indirect, to be more wanting to seek agreement, to get along, that type of thing. Males, on the other hand, are generally enculturated to be able to deal more with conflict and be direct in their messages. Those are just generalizations. Do you think they're true? Good question. Some people may feel that these are true and others may not.